I still remember the moment my sedan turned onto Riverstone Drive, the main artery threading through Evergreen Heights. Rows of picturesque homes dotted rolling hillsides, each yard impeccably manicured. From the promotional materials, the neighborhood promised scenic vistas and a sense of refined living, meticulously overseen by an attentive homeowners association. After years serving as the state geologist, traveling between geological surveys and public safety consultations, I craved a serene place to settle. My job often involved investigating slope stability, mining regulations, and hazard mitigation. Rarely did I get to enjoy normal suburb life. So, when I discovered a charming craftsman home perched near a gentle slope in Evergreen Heights, I hoped it would be my peaceful sanctuary. Moving day was brisk and efficient. As I oversaw movers carrying boxes, a woman in her 50s, hair frosted and styled into a neat bob, wearing a pastel blazer despite the midday sun, strolled up, arms folded. She introduced herself with a polite yet firm voice, Belinda Arrington, though, I'd soon learn, many neighbors privately called her Karen. She was the chairwoman of the HOA board, she announced, adopting an air of measured authority. "Welcome," she said, scanning the half-unpacked boxes in my driveway. "I'm Ms. Arrington, the final word on HOA matters here. I trust you'll keep the premises in compliance with our covenants. We at Evergreen Heights hold our image in high regard." I forced a friendly smile. "Pleased to meet you. I'm Dr. Rowan Lindstrom. Of course, we'll respect the guidelines." She nodded, gaze flitting to the mild hillside beyond my backyard. "We have rules about landscaping, especially near the slopes. We can't allow eyesores or unsafe modifications. Let me know if you have questions." I assured her I wouldn't alter anything drastically. As a geologist, I was well aware that messing with slopes required caution. Still, I had no clue that Ms. Arrington was conducting a clandestine project on that very hillside, one with catastrophic potential. Nor did she realize that the unassuming new neighbor she was lecturing was actually the state geologist, armed with the authority to investigate and halt reckless land alterations. Thus began my quiet life in Evergreen Heights, unaware that soon, Ms. Arrington's arrogance would ignite a crisis that threatened to bury the neighborhood in mud and land her in dire legal jeopardy. Settling into the routine of Evergreen Heights, I occasionally strolled along the winding paths near the base of the main hillside, enjoying glimpses of pine groves and a small creek. I noticed, however, strange activity, faint paint markings on rocks, small wooden stakes hammered into the ground, and a subtle churn of earth in certain spots. It looked like survey markers or signs of preliminary construction. Yet no official signage indicated a city-permitted project. Curious, I asked a neighbor, Marta, about it. She shrugged. "I've heard rumors the HOA wants to build some sort of lookout gazebo or new clubhouse extension up there. But it's hush-hush. Ms. Arrington keeps the details secret, claiming she'll announce it when the time is right. We suspect it might be a private venture for her own gain." People saw her meeting with contractors late at night. Alarm bells rang in my geologist's mind. The hillside, while picturesque, had underlying clay layers and fractured bedrock. Any major disturbance could risk slope instability. Typically, you'd need thorough geological surveys and city permits. If Ms. Arrington was proceeding without proper oversight, it spelled potential disaster. During a routine grocery run, I noticed Ms. Arrington chatting with a contractor in the parking lot. They parted abruptly when I approached, as though concealing something. She gave me a pinched smile, then hurried off. My instincts said she was orchestrating an unapproved project, but I had no hard proof, only speculation and a sense of deepening concern. As the official state geologist, I typically oversaw broader issues like flood zones or statewide hazard planning. But this matter struck close to home, literally. I decided to keep watch, discreetly. If Ms. Arrington truly was conducting hill excavations without professional input, the resulting erosion or slope failure could devastate houses below. The stakes were high, yet the secrecy made it tricky to intervene. I had no idea how far Ms. Arrington would go to secure her vanity project, nor how fiercely she would lash out if challenged. Only later would I realize that her meddling threatened an entire hillside, and that it would soon unleash a destructive landslide with horrifying consequences. Curious about the hush-hush construction, I attended the next monthly HOA meeting. The community center was a neat building with pastel walls, rows of folding chairs facing a table where Ms. Arrington and two board members presided. Neighbors brought up typical concerns: fence heights, noise complaints, yard maintenance. A sense of polite tension hung in the air, as though everyone dreaded crossing Ms. Arrington's steely gaze. Finally, under new business, a resident asked about strange digging on the hillside. Ms. Arrington's face tightened. "We are exploring improvements to the open space," she stated curtly. "No final plans yet. The board will inform the community when appropriate." Next item. The resident persisted, pressing for details about who was paying for the work, if there was an engineering study. Ms. Arrington banged a small gavel. "No need for alarm. The board has it under control. We maintain full authority to enhance our scenic overlooks. That hillside is HOA property, after all." Her dismissive tone grated on me. As a geologist, I knew enhancing scenic overlooks was no trivial matter on a slope with potential instability. Even a small miscalculation in excavation or load distribution could lead to dangerous soil movements. I raised my hand. "Excuse me, Ms. Arrington. Has the HOA consulted any professional geotechnical or environmental experts about the hillside stability? Projects near slopes often require thorough analysis." Her eyes flicked toward me. "Dr. Lindstrom, is it? We appreciate your concern, but this is a modest landscaping initiative. We've engaged a landscaping crew. We don't need to overcomplicate it with so-called experts. Please trust the board's judgment." A murmur spread through the room. Some seemed uneasy with her cavalier stance. I pressed gently. Even modest changes can have unforeseen consequences if the slope is sensitive. I'm a geologist, and I'm aware that this region's soil composition can be unstable. Might be wise to at least do a quick survey to avoid risk. She gave a tight smile. "We appreciate your expertise, but the board decides these matters." Meeting adjourned. She banged the gavel, ignoring my attempt to protest. People filed out, some shooting me sympathetic looks. Ms. Arrington left swiftly, reasserting her final say. Walking home, frustration gnawed at me. Ms. Arrington's arrogance risked more than a spat over fences. She was playing with a hillside that, if compromised, could bury homes in mud. I resolved to quietly investigate the site further, gather geological data, and possibly raise the alarm with local authorities if needed. Because if Ms. Arrington kept ignoring professional advice, a devastating landslide was only a matter of time. Over the next month, rumors intensified. At odd hours, neighbors heard machinery operating near the hillside: bulldozers, excavators, or trucks hauling soil. Some glimpsed newly carved pathways or partial retaining walls that vanished overnight. Ms. Arrington was evidently forging ahead with her so-called improvements, but refused to disclose details. The board members mostly stayed silent, presumably cowed by her. I took a few quiet hikes around the perimeter. Observing the slope, I spotted fresh cuts in the earth, unsupported trenches, and piles of displaced soil near the top. My professional alarm rang full force. The hillside was layered with soft clay and weathered rock, forming a precarious structure. The slightest misstep in removing soil or vegetation could trigger creeping instability. Large-scale excavation, especially with heavy equipment, was a recipe for slope failure. At a city level, typically one must file for a grading permit to ensure compliance with safety codes. Yet the city's records listed no such permit for major earthworks in Evergreen Heights. Ms. Arrington must be circumventing oversight. Possibly she told the contractor to do it off the books, relying on her HOA authority to quell local objections. I confided in a neighbor, an older man named Ned who had lived here for decades. He said Ms. Arrington recently boasted about building a luxury clubhouse extension with a panoramic view, rumored to be partially funded by HOA dues, but also by her personal pocket for future events. If it succeeded, she'd claim credit for boosting property values. But if it failed, Ned shuddered. I've seen minor landslides here before. The ground can shift after heavy rain. This is madness. My anger smoldered. People's homes and safety were at stake. Yet Ms. Arrington was forging ahead out of vanity or ambition. I decided enough was enough. I would gather photographic evidence of the compromised slope, compile a geological hazard assessment, and escalate this to the city's code enforcement or even state environmental regulators. As the official state geologist, I had the standing to push them to act. Ms. Arrington might try to hide behind HOA independence, but she was not above real law. Still, a nagging worry lingered. If she was so brazen as to ignore typical permits, might she ramp up intimidation against me or others who opposed her? Regardless, we had no choice. That hillside was a ticking time bomb, and Ms. Arrington's reckless project was lighting the fuse. One evening, after dark, I slipped out to document the hillside's condition under the moonlight, hoping to avoid immediate confrontation with the contractor. I carried a flashlight, camera, and a small notebook. As I neared the half-dug terraces, the earth felt loose beneath my boots. The faint hum of machinery came from higher up, suggesting clandestine work continuing even at night. Edging closer, I snapped photos of the raw, exposed soil layers, noting cracks forming in the slope face. My gut churned. These cracks indicated tension in the soil, a sign that part of the hillside might be on the verge of slippage. If we had a heavy rainfall or seismic tremor, the entire mass could break free. Suddenly, headlights flared behind me. A pickup truck approached, stopping yards away. Two men jumped out, glowering. "This is private HOA property," one barked. "What are you doing here?" I steadied my voice. "I'm just documenting potential geological hazards. I have the right as a concerned resident, also as a state official." They cut me off. "We have orders from Ms. Arrington to keep trespassers away. Hand over that camera. You have no business interfering." My heart hammered. I refused to relinquish my camera. The men advanced, tension thick in the air. Before a physical confrontation escalated, I invoked my position. "I'm the state geologist. If you assault me or destroy my documentation, you'll face serious legal repercussions." That gave them pause. One man hissed, "You'd best leave before we call the HOA security." Unwilling to risk violence, I retreated, but not before securing the camera's memory card safely. I'd captured enough to show the alarming state of the slope. Once home, I typed a preliminary hazard report, highlighting the immediate risk of slope failure due to unpermitted excavation. I resolved to deliver it to City Code enforcement first thing in the morning. Ms. Arrington's hired heavies might have scared me off physically, but the truth about that hillside was coming to light. My worst fears began to materialize sooner than expected. That very week, a neighbor living at the base of the slope, Ms. Delgado, reported unusual cracking in her backyard patio. She noticed new fissures in the retaining wall and slight tilts in the fence posts. "It's like the ground is shifting," she told me, anxious. "We've never had cracks before, and it's gotten worse after they started messing with the hill." Alarmed, I visited Ms. Delgado's home. Indeed, the cracks were fresh, diagonal lines across the concrete, a telltale sign the soil beneath was migrating downhill. In the corner of the yard, the topsoil seemed to bulge. I gently pressed my foot on it, feeling spongy movement. This spelled incipient slope creep, an early stage of potential landslide. If Ms. Arrington's illegal excavation continued, we could see a catastrophic slope failure, burying Ms. Delgado's home and possibly others. Ms. Delgado wanted to contact the HOA, but Ms. Arrington was the HOA. We knew she'd dismiss or belittle the concern. Instead, Ms. Delgado filed an urgent complaint with the city building department, citing structural danger. I provided my professional assessment, labeling the situation high risk, requiring immediate cessation of hillside work. Yet, city bureaucracy ground slowly. A single code inspector visited the site, apparently placated by Ms. Arrington's explanation that we're just landscaping. She promised to provide engineering plans soon. Meanwhile, the excavation continued at night. The soil continued to shift. I realized I must escalate further. I updated my hazard report, referencing Ms. Delgado's cracks, and I sent it to the state-level Department of Land and Natural Resources. Given my position, I had direct channels to share evidence. If Ms. Arrington wouldn't heed local officials, perhaps a higher authority could forcibly stop the project. But as official cogs turned, the slope's integrity deteriorated daily, each passing moment raising the likelihood of a violent landslide. As if orchestrated by fate, a heavy storm system rolled in from the west, dumping torrential rain on evergreen heights. The parched hillside turned sodden. Water seeped into the compromised soil layers, weakening them further. Over 2 nights of incessant downpour, the tension cracks expanded. The newly excavated sections lost any semblance of stability. On the third evening, I was preparing dinner when frantic phone calls lit up my phone. The hillside is collapsing. My heart lurched. Rushing outside, I saw the sky illuminated by emergency vehicle lights near the slope. A deep rumble shook the ground, followed by a roar akin to thunder. Earth gave way in a massive slide, a wall of mud and debris cascading downhill toward Ms. Delgado's house and others in its path. By the time I arrived, firefighters and police were evacuating the lower street. Ms. Delgado's home was partially buried in mud up to the windows, toppled trees, and rock chunks pressed against the walls. Mercifully, the family had escaped in time. Several neighboring yards were inundated with sludge, fences obliterated. Residents wept, huddled in shock. The air reeked of wet earth and panic. From glimpses in the gloom, I saw that a large scar marred the hillside, a collapsed section exactly where Ms. Arrington's clandestine excavation had carved out supports. Water still gushed down, carrying silt. The scale of destruction was horrifying. Tens of thousands of cubic yards of soil had slid, flattening everything in its path. In the distance, Ms. Arrington stood, pale and trembling, presumably reeling that her project had unleashed such devastation. Or maybe she was frantically concocting an alibi. Rescue crews rushed around, ensuring no one was trapped. By sheer luck, injuries were minor, but property damage was immense. The entire slope was at risk of further collapse if the rains persisted. As I tried to help direct emergency personnel, an overwhelming sadness and anger gripped me. This outcome, long feared, was now reality. Ms. Arrington's arrogance had wrought a disaster that could have killed people, and she couldn't hide from this consequence. Morning revealed the landslide's full horror in daylight. A wide swath of hillside had slumped, leaving a raw, muddy scarp at the top. Several homes below were heavily damaged, their yards swallowed by debris. The local news helicopter hovered overhead, broadcasting the images of devastation. On the ground, paramedics, utility crews, and city engineers assessed the damage. Ms. Arrington was nowhere to be seen. Neighbors demanded answers. Those who lost property were livid, recalling the repeated warnings Ms. Arrington dismissed. Ms. Delgado sobbed, while watching bulldozers clear the muck from her destroyed patio. Others cursed the HOA's secrecy. Online chatter labeled Ms. Arrington's project the cause of this landslide. Even those unaffected recognized the entire neighborhood's property values plummeted in the wake of such a catastrophic event. City officials, prodded by the state, launched an immediate investigation. They posted "Do Not Occupy" notices on the worst-hit houses due to structural instability. The Code Enforcement Office discovered no valid permits for major slope work. The insurance companies started disclaimers that if the HOA or Ms. Arrington personally authorized unapproved excavation, they might deny coverage for the resulting damages, leaving homeowners in potential financial ruin. In a sorrowful turn, some neighbors found their life savings pinned in these properties. Now, with the hillside collapsed, their futures were uncertain. Some might be forced to relocate. Meanwhile, Ms. Arrington remained silent, rumored to be conferring with lawyers. That is, until the city announced a public hearing to investigate the cause and assign liability. Privately, I steeled myself to present the geological evidence. I had photos, hazard assessments, and eyewitness accounts that pinned the blame squarely on Ms. Arrington's unauthorized excavation. If she tried to deflect responsibility, she'd face a tidal wave of facts. The emotional toll on residents only increased the desire for a scapegoat, and Ms. Arrington, the orchestrator of the fiasco, was the prime candidate. The time had come for her to be held accountable for the nightmare she created. A few days later, the city council convened an emergency hearing, inviting local officials, geotechnical experts, and affected homeowners to testify about the landslide. The hearing drew significant media coverage, with cameras capturing the hushed tension in the council chambers. Ms. Arrington arrived with a lawyer, a haunted look replacing her usual haughty demeanor. The city building inspector testified first, explaining how the hillside had been stable for decades until recent extensive excavation compromised supporting layers. Then Ms. Delgado tearfully recounted the dramatic moment her backyard collapsed under waves of mud, displaying photos of the cracked foundation. A geotechnical engineer from the state corroborated that unauthorized digging had removed key load-bearing soils, creating the slide risk, exacerbated by heavy rain. Finally, I took the stand as the state geologist. I presented the photographic evidence from my nighttime visits, showing partial retaining walls, open trenches, and unshored cuts. I described how the slope's clay layers needed careful engineering if disturbed, referencing standard guidelines Ms. Arrington ignored. Concluding, I said, had the HOA or Ms. Arrington secured professional input, we would have mandated slope stabilization steps and drainage measures. Instead, they proceeded in secret, leading to an entirely preventable catastrophe. The council turned to Ms. Arrington. She stammered, "I only meant to enhance our community with a scenic overlook. My contractors told me the ground was safe enough. I had no idea it'd trigger a landslide." She insisted she wasn't personally liable, that the HOA was collectively responsible. But emails revealed she single-handedly greenlit the project, bypassing standard approval procedures, paying off contractors from discretionary HOA funds. The hearing concluded with the city announcing possible criminal charges for reckless endangerment and unpermitted excavation. Civil suits from displaced homeowners loomed large. Ms. Arrington's lawyer tried to pivot blame onto the contractors, yet the council members saw through it, releasing a statement condemning her gross negligence. As Ms. Arrington left, the gathered crowd murmured heatedly. Many demanded her resignation from the HOA, if not an immediate arrest. The mood signaled that Ms. Arrington's downfall was imminent. She'd gambled the community's safety for her vanity project, and the dice had come up snakes. Days later, local prosecutors, armed with the city's findings, charged Ms. Arrington with multiple counts: reckless endangerment, illegal land alteration, and violation of municipal safety codes. They alleged that her private order for extensive hillside excavation, without permits or geotechnical oversight, directly led to the destructive landslide. The community applauded the DA's bold move, hoping for justice. Law enforcement served Ms. Arrington an arrest warrant at her pristine home. Cameras caught images of her being led to a police car, head bowed, her once imperious composure shattered. The headlines read, "HOA chair behind deadly landslide surrenders to police." Though no fatalities occurred, the fiasco was still labeled deadly by the press for the near misses and potential for loss of life. A swirl of lawsuits accompanied the criminal case. Homeowners whose properties were damaged filed civil suits for restitution. Some lost entire floors to mud or had to rebuild. Insurance companies threatened subrogation claims if Ms. Arrington or the HOA was found negligent. The new HOA leadership scrambled to disclaim her unilateral decisions, cooperating with investigators to prove they'd never approved such massive excavation. Throughout the chaos, I provided official statements to the prosecution, explaining how Ms. Arrington's disregard for warnings and standard procedure spelled direct cause for the slope's failure. The more evidence surfaced, the clearer her guilt became. She had no legitimate engineering plan, no soil stability study, no city permit, just an ambition to carve the hillside to suit her grand vision of a scenic vantage. Court watchers speculated Ms. Arrington might attempt a plea deal. The potential maximum sentence for such reckless endangerment was considerable. Meanwhile, the community rallied around the victims, organizing fundraisers to help them relocate or rebuild. The overshadowing sense was that Ms. Arrington had betrayed their trust, sacrificing their safety for her own illusions of neighborhood improvement. Ms. Arrington's trial commenced in the county courthouse, an event overshadowed by intense local media coverage. Citizens packed the gallery, many from Evergreen Heights, some from broader circles outraged by the story of a domineering HOA official playing fast and loose with geology. The prosecution laid out the timeline. Ms. Arrington, seeking a lavish hillside project, hired unlicensed contractors to excavate the slope covertly. She circumvented all legal channels, ignoring or silencing neighbors who questioned the plan. She kept no legitimate engineering oversight, ignoring repeated caution from residents and me about slope hazards. Ultimately, heavy rains triggered the destabilized hillside to collapse, damaging multiple homes. Witness after witness testified. Ms. Delgado on the heartbreak of nearly losing her home. Contractors admitting Ms. Arrington told them, no need for a permit. The HOA has final say. City inspectors revealing no record of any official submission. My own testimony as the state geologist spelled out the direct link between the unapproved excavation and the slope's catastrophic failure. The scientific cause and effect was indisputable. Ms. Arrington's defense tried blaming the contractors or citing unusual rainfall. But cross-examination revealed she had final authority. She'd refused professional surveys, and she pushed the project despite known risks. Emails also exposed her private statements about ignoring bureaucratic nonsense to expedite her plan. In the end, the jury found Ms. Arrington guilty on all major counts. The judge, referencing the near loss of life and large-scale property damage, denounced her egotistical negligence, stating she had effectively played dice with the community's well-being. Ms. Arrington stood ashen, tears in her eyes, overshadowed by the weight of her convictions. At the sentencing hearing, the court heard impact statements from the families whose homes were destroyed or condemned. They spoke of uprooted lives, shattered finances, and trauma from the near disaster. Ms. Arrington appeared hollow, her once fierce mien replaced by a broken countenance. She tried apologizing, but the judge deemed it too little, too late. The verdict, 2.5 years in state prison for reckless endangerment and illegal excavation leading to a landslide, plus a steep restitution order. The judge authorized the seizure and sale of Ms. Arrington's house to help pay for the massive damages inflicted on neighbors. The final gavel sealed her fate. She was handcuffed and escorted out, weeping at the collapse of the life she'd built, her illusions of a perfect neighborhood undone by her own hubris. News outlets nationwide picked up the sensational story. HOA chair jailed over landslide. Illegal excavation wrecks homes. The moral was stark. No local authority is above real laws of geology or city code. Meanwhile, the new HOA board vowed to restore trust, re-implement transparent oversight, and never again allow one official to unilaterally alter the land. In the landslide's aftermath, Evergreen Heights faced a major rebuilding effort. Crews erected temporary retaining walls, clearing debris and stabilizing the slope. Some families relocated, fearful of living near a scarred hillside. Others bravely stayed, determined to reclaim their community. The city worked with geotechnical experts to design a permanent slope stabilization plan, funded partly by insurance, partly by the seized assets from Ms. Arrington. Local volunteers organized fund drives, collecting donations for displaced neighbors. Bake sales, rummage sales, and charitable events abounded. The spirit of cooperation soared, ironically strengthened by adversity. Many realized how Ms. Arrington's dictatorship had overshadowed genuine neighborly bonds. Now, with her gone, they could unify for mutual benefit. For my part, I aided the city's geological consultants, sharing my knowledge of the local soil profiles. We developed an improved drainage system and retaining structure to prevent future slides, ensuring residents below the slope could sleep with peace of mind. The fiasco also spurred me to champion new legislation requiring stricter oversight of HOAs attempting large earthworks, so no other neighborhood would repeat Evergreen Heights' painful lesson. Months later, the slope was mostly stabilized, the community center restored to normal. The scar on the hillside lingered as a visible reminder of Ms. Arrington's recklessness. People occasionally recounted how her thirst for a scenic vantage overshadowed professional advice, culminating in a near tragedy. Her name became shorthand for caution, a local legend of hubris undone. Meanwhile, Ms. Arrington served her prison term, her once luxurious home repossessed to fund repairs for the neighbors she harmed. After release, rumors said she moved out of state, presumably trying to vanish from the humiliating legacy that followed her. Few, if any, missed her presence. The new HOA leadership codified rules requiring licensed engineering reviews for any slope-related proposals, disclaiming any single official from unilateral expansions or modifications. At occasional community gatherings, people recognized me as the geologist who took down Karen. I insisted it was the law of nature that truly toppled her. She simply tried to defy the fundamentals of geology. Without her misguided meddling, we might have enjoyed a scenic improvement plan done safely. Instead, she forced a fiasco that tested the entire community's resilience. In the end, the tragedy unified Evergreen Heights. Freed from Ms. Arrington's tyranny, neighbors discovered a kinder approach to governance, with real input from professionals whenever the land was involved. They also learned that the Earth's stability is not optional. Land is not a blank canvas for vanity. The final moral stands. No one, not even an HOA chair with illusions of grandeur, can outrun the consequences of ignoring nature's laws.